Hello, Dr. Merriman. It is so nice to see you, and I'm looking forward to speaking about your wonderful institution, the Horniman Museum and Gardens in London. And congratulations on your recent win of the Art Fund Prize, Museum of the Year for 2022. Congratulations.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's lovely to be talking to you.
Wonderful. I would love if you could just start by telling us a little bit more about Horniman, about your institution, and about kind of what drove the jury to give you this wonderful prize.
Sure. So the background to the Horniman Museum, we're a Horniman Museum and Gardens. So we stem from the late 19th century when our founder, Frederick Horniman, who made his money from his family tea firm. They're one of the largest tea businesses in the British Empire at the time. So the money they made from that when he took over the company allowed him to indulge his passion for collecting human cultures and natural history. He opened his collection to the public in his private house in the late 19th century. And then the story is his wife sort of said, "It's me or the collection." So they moved the house, and then he demolished the museum house and paid for a purpose-built museum, which opened in 1901, and he donated all of his collections to the people of London, run by London County Council, and what became later 16 acres of gardens with some of the best views of central London. So we're now London's only museum where you've got nature and culture together in the same place at a global scale. And Frederick Horniman said he wanted to bring the world to Forest Hill. Forest Hill is the local area in London. And now, because of London's demographics, the world has also come, in terms of people, to Forest Hill. We're a very diverse local community. And what's also interesting, I think, about the Horniman is that we're government funded. So we're a kind of nationally funded, but we're a community museum. We have people who come again and again over generations to visit us. And 75% of our visitors are local families, mostly with young children. So we've got a real opportunity to engage them both lifelong and also through the generations.
Wonderful. That's an incredible. I love that vision of the mirror of Horniman wanting to bring the world to London. And now, just given the current state of the world, we're ever increasing international with more people moving all over for a variety of reasons, and coming to London to live and bringing the world
Exactly.
to your doorstep as well.
Yeah.
So what a wonderful synergy there. I would love to hear more about what the jury for the Art Fund Prize for Museum of the Year, what is it they reflected back to you that really kind of was prize worthy of the work that you've been doing?
So the prize is given for a museum's work in the year prior to the award of the prize. So for us, it was what we really did in 2021. And that stems back a few years because, as you know, museums, their planning cycle is quite long. So I started at the Horniman 5 years ago now, and coming in with a new sort of pair of eyes. My predecessor done a brilliant job in transforming the organization. The only thing I think was that it didn't have a really clear, distinctive purpose. So we identified we're the only museum in London with nature and culture together. So that put us in a really good position to engage our diverse audience with issues of social justice and climate justice and the interconnections between those. Particularly, as I say, that we have a very young audience, and we know that the parents and carers of the little children are really worried about the future those kids are going to be growing up in relation to the state of the world, particularly around climate, but also other social issues. So we did a new mission, which is really about working with our audiences to shape a positive future for the world we all share. So it's all about positivity and not sort of getting downbeaten by all of the issues that everyone's facing. And then, of course, the big thing was the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, leading to the renaissance of the Black Lives Matter movement. And our realization, which had already been in train, the Horniman is essentially a colonial museum. Mr. Horniman collected from throughout the British Empire. And we'd been starting work on acknowledging this, but So COVID, with its origins to a large extent in mismanagement of the environment by people, and then Black Lives Matter, said that we've really got to double down on these issues. So we developed what we call the reset agenda, which was 7 areas we needed to accelerate activity in. The biggest one was actually diversifying our audience. The audience, as so with so many museums, doesn't reflect the diversity of the local population. And one of the reasons for that is that many community members felt that the colonial origins made it a place not for them. So we began a whole program of trying to make ourselves more welcome to more diverse audiences and dealing with some of this colonial legacy. So kind of specifically what was cited by the Art Fund was a range of things that we did in 2021 to address those diversity and inclusion issues and the climate crisis. So I should have said that almost as a subset of our anthropology collections, we have what colleagues tell me is one of the best, if not the best, collection of musical instruments in the world, which is truly global in nature.
Yeah.
And we'd identified that, of course, music is pretty universal. Everybody likes some form of music. And also in our area in South London, it's a real hotbed of creativity. Amongst young Black people in particular, developing genres like Afrobeat, reggae, grime, rap, and so on. But they wouldn't be the typical visitor to the museum. So we developed a project called 696, which means nothing to most people, but it was the name of a police risk assessment used disproportionately to close down Black music venues. So with the demographic we're trying to target, it really resonated. And we recruited 15 young Black creatives to come and be resident artists in the Horniman, to sample sounds from our musical instruments and create new work, which we then showcased in intimate gigs in our conservatory. And we complemented that with a summer-long program of quite large-scale outdoor free activities showcasing local Black music talent. We did an exhibition called Dance Can't Nice, which is the name, a line from a Sugar Minott song, I'm told, which was a sort of artistic installation of spaces where music is made in South London, in the Black community, the church or the chapel, the bedroom, the front hall, the barber shop, that sort of thing. And we did a whole series of programs trying to engage a wider community. Our biggest minority ethnic group locally is actually British Nigerian. So we did a big program called Nigeria 60, which was around the 60th anniversary of Nigerian independence. And we did a project called Ode to the Ancestors, which was done by a community member, which I'll perhaps touch on a little bit later. And then we did a whole series of initiatives relating to the climate crisis, because during COVID lockdowns, our gardens remained open. And we got loads of great feedback for people thanking us for keeping the gardens open, where they could sort of put themselves together, work on their mental health. And we did a crowd-funded scheme to plant a microforest on one side of our site, which is by one of London's busiest and most polluted roads. And a local girl had, a few years before, become the first person whose death was attributed to air pollution from cars. So this is a really big local issue. And we got the funding to plant 900 trees as a microforest, forming a barrier against noise and pollution. So a whole series of activities in 2021, which had begun earlier and accelerated because of the reset agenda developed during COVID.
Well, it's a Herculean task, all of the things that you've pulled together. It's an impressive list of projects, of programming. I would love to hear, I have many questions. It gets the juices really, really flowing. One of the things I'm curious about is how to balance and pull together the variety of needs to create that programming that has brought you to this point. As you said, it was a long-term planning project, of course, that was accelerated because of need. How do you take this momentum of this robust programming, and how do you carry the work forward to continue to serve and work with your communities?
I think the big shift that we're getting to grips with is that, of course, we're not the experts in this, and we can only really begin to make a bigger and longer term impact, particularly around diversity, if we work in partnership with others. So the Horniman's approach to partnership actually has always been one of long-term partnerships. So it's not just partnerships project by project, which are then dropped. So we now have a long-term partnership with some of the young musicians and the other very widespread communities that we began to engage with in the last few years. We've got long-term partnerships with health providers. There's a local mental health trust and so on. So most of our programming that's successful in diversifying our audience is about that long-term partnership commitment. And it's begun to impact our curatorial side as well. I mean, traditionally, again, as you know, museums, they employ experts, usually on objects and material culture, who kind of tell people about what they mean. We're shifting that. I mean, we have anthropology curators, as you would imagine, whose modus operandi has always been to work in partnership with communities that they're engaged with. And we've created a new post actually within that team called Curator of Social Practice. And what that means is that their whole job is to work with communities to use the Horniman's collections to create meaning for them on their terms. And sort of really that co-creation, co-curation, collaboration mode is the way in which we're trying to develop most of our projects now, and handing over a lot of power and authority to members of the community to do work that is of interest to them.
Right, and I do think that is the big shift that we're seeing in the field of ceding authority, sharing, and then using the platform and the power that is museums and arts and cultural spaces to give voice to folks that have not been privileged in that voice, up till now, or have been marginalized for some reason or another. And that seems to be a great model of success.
Yeah, we developed a program as well called Community Action Research Project, which again we'd done a prior project actually thinking about the future of our African collections, which we'd done in collaboration with some other UK museums and partners in Kenya and Nigeria, which showed that there's real appetite amongst communities for understanding more and getting involved more in the collections we hold. So we recruited a bunch, about 8, I think, members of the local Black community through the Black Cultural Archives, which is local to us, who were interested in finding out more about their collections, about our collections. And we trained them in how to use museum archives, because it's really difficult to sort of access records. So, how do museum archives work? How does documentation work? How does the computer database work? And we armed them and facilitated them to conduct research on topics that were of interest to them. That then produced a podcast, which is still available online, called Afro Historyscapes, where community members talk for half an hour or an hour on objects and themes that were of interest to them. One of them, a community researcher called Sherry Davis, got very interested in some Kenyan archaeological collections that we hold, which were excavated and published by white British archaeologists in academic journals. But she got very interested in the fact that in the photographs, of course, a lot of the workforce was Kenyan. And she realized that, believe it or not, her grandfather was one of the people on the team.
Oh, wow.
She started a project to find the names and reclaim the history of the Black workforce who had actually done all the work. And they weren't just laborers, but they were also experts, and they were the first generation of Kenyan archaeologists. So we then worked with Sherry to produce an exhibition that's still on, actually, called Ode to the Ancestors, which gives a name and a voice to that workforce with which she had a very personal family collection. So it's just a really good example of how once you start engaging communities, the paths can take very unexpected turns in ways that are actually immensely fulfilling and rich for everyone involved.
That's a wonderful point. And I think, hats off to you and your team for opening those pathways and then being willing to take the journey with the community members. It's one thing to invite people in, but to be open to the opportunities that present themselves and then to pursue them congratulations. I mean, that's the work, right? As well. So it's important to take those next few steps down the road, beyond just opening the doors. So
exactly.
It's no wonder that you captured the attention of Art Fund Prize. Congratulations again. One of the things I'd love to hear is any advice you would have for other institutions that are trying to take a journey like this, whether that's being more welcoming to their community, having those partnerships, and also, as you touched on, really head on addressing the colonialist legacy and the challenges of the histories that many of our institutions face in white supremacy colonialism. That's the history that we have. So how do we address that and work with the community to build something special now together? What advice would you give to someone looking to follow in your footsteps in that way?
Yeah. Well, I think you've got to be in it for the long term. I mean, it is a long-term transformation, particularly if you're thinking about diversifying visitor numbers. That does take a long-term whole organization commitment from, who you hire, who your volunteers are, who visitors see welcoming them, through to your board and your policies and your program, everything. In terms of the sort of inclusive programming and working on the colonial legacy, listen. I think one of the first thing in our reset agenda is consult, listen, and work in partnership. We don't know the answers, and we don't have the same experience as people who have sort of heritage legacies of slavery and oppression and so on. So we need to listen and act. I mean, crucially, I would say get on with it. It's many people are hesitant to act because they feel they might be criticized, they might get it wrong, or somehow it's not perfect.
Yes.
It's messy. Get on with it. Show your commitment, having listened, of course, to the people about what the priorities are, and learn by doing. Inaction is worse than action.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great advice. The one other thing I'm curious about, we didn't touch on yet, is just you've had these wildly successful programs, building community, working directly with community, collaborating and co-creating. What were some of the challenges that you kind of were faced with in launching the Reset Agenda and getting these things off the ground? What were some of the challenges? And then it sounds like many of them are big successes, but if you have any particular ones you'd like to share, I'd love to hear more.
Yes, I mean the challenges were the kind of global ones that we were operating in. So in 2021, we were in the UK. We had a COVID lockdown from the beginning of January through to the beginning of March, and of course that makes planning very difficult. We had a big summer program of events, but of course at the beginning of the year we didn't know whether any of them were going to be permitted. I mean, we were lucky in the sense that by the time these programs I've mentioned were happening, we were back open, but we were still having to be very careful about social distancing and so on. And we had to put in all sorts of unanticipated measures around pre-booking and a sort of fixed route through the museum, and for the outside events we had to manage numbers in a much more controlled way. So there were a lot of additional planning and actually financial commitments that we had to sort of confront to do that. But in terms of the other sort of challenges that one might expect, be it criticism from people who think it's all woke doing this sort of stuff. I mean, we really didn't get any. That's partly, I think, because the Horniman is not a central London national museum like the V&A or the British Museum or whatever, so it doesn't get quite so much attention. And also being rooted in its diverse community and working closely with that, I think we were, because of our practice, I think we'd got quite a good degree of trust. So people, when we did unusual things, people were generally supportive. So another thing I haven't mentioned was that where after the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston was toppled into the port in Bristol, there were some criticisms of all sorts of sort of major Victorian figures, including actually Frederick Horniman, who was decried on a website as an arch colonialist. We'd seen him actually as a Quaker philanthropist and generally sort of good guy. But it caused us to show that actually the tea money was derived from tea in China, which was paid for by opium smuggled into China by the East India Company, which grew the opium in India. and so kind of indirectly, they were buying tea in London on the market and may not have been so aware of the supply chain. But there was a very dark story that was much less well known. So we put additional panels in our displays on the Horniman family in the gallery. Again, we only got praise for that as telling a wider and more nuanced story. So the challenges, as I say, were really kind of logistical challenges to do with COVID and with money and with declining visitors, rather than anything to do particularly with how we carried out the program itself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're really touching on that important point. Is it's about the wider history, the more nuanced story. The history is what it is, but we get it. It's problematic when we tell partial truths or half histories or part stories, and we don't have more context and information. Wonderful. My last question is just a little bit off the cuff, so I hope you'll forgive me. But I'm just curious that the list of successes is long, the list of projects is long. What are you most proud of in the work that you've been doing with your team?
I think it's that music program 696, where we really did we were successful in that we did both attract a much wider audience for the program itself, which was quite extensive program, as I say, of exhibitions and particularly musical performances. But crucially, we also moved the dials on the audience diversity. 3%, but that's actually quite a big shift in 1 year when you've only ever got 100%. So other things have got to shift as well. So we're trying to keep up that momentum at the moment, and I suppose as part of that, the way of doing things in the Horniman to be more responsive to its community was transformed in the doing of those various projects. So we're kind of now in a place where this kind of work is quite natural, rather than being seen as something kind of new and slightly scary.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations. It was wonderful to get to hear about the great work at Horniman Museum and Gardens, a well-deserved Museum of the Year prize for 2022. I look forward to hearing the great things you and your team keep accomplishing working with the community. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Many thanks, Sarah.